Welcome to the Bluestocking Circle podcast, Lady Nerds on Popular Culture. We're your hosts, B
and Grisel.
This is episode 21, Matilda. In today's episode, we will be discussing Matilda, both the 1988 book by Roald Dahl, and yes, that is how you pronounce it, and the 1996 movie adaptation starring Mara Wilson as the title character. Although none of us have had the chance to see Matilda the musical yet, we did hear the cast recordings, and we read the Wikipedia entry. So consider this your spoiler warning for Matilda the book, Matilda the movie, and Matilda the musical. One last note before we begin. We are very happy to have our first ever guest on the podcast. Welcome, Monica.
Hello.
Hi, Monica.
But before we formally introduce Monica, let's formally introduce Matilda. Ready?
Ready.
Then let's be a little bit naughty. In an article celebrating Matilda's 30th birthday, Donna Ferguson of The Guardian called her the quintessential young rebel who broke all the rules about how good little girls should be portrayed in children's literature by standing up to bullies in the name of justice and having a laugh at the same time. Is it any wonder so many baby Bluestockings grew up looking up to Matilda? She almost didn't exist though, at least not in the way we know her. The first Matilda was a bit of a bully herself, who used her powers to financially save her sweet teacher, not by righting wrongs, but instead by fixing a horse race. This initial Matilda died at the end of her own story, and horrified Dahl's editor Stephen Roxburgh so much that he called the book hopeless. Thankfully, Dahl discarded this first version of the novel and wrote a new one starring the Matilda we know and love today. Published in 1988, it was his first work focusing almost entirely on female characters, and the last of his children's novels to be published during his lifetime. Matilda was met with good, if not great reviews, and became popular enough to receive a film adaptation in 1996, starring Mara Wilson as the eponymous character. This Americanized adaptation was also met with positive reviews, but made only $33 million at the box office domestically, worth about $54 million today. However, something as strange and wonderful as the protagonist herself has happened in the last decade. Matilda has become more popular and powerful than ever. The book now regularly appears on lists of the top 100 children's and young adult novels of all time, with Time pronouncing it Roald Dahl's most compelling read for young people. Moreover, Matilda the musical premiered in 2010 to great success, moving to the West End in 2011 and reaching Broadway in 2013. The musical has received universal critical acclaim and has been seen by 8 million people in about 70 cities so far. It won 4 competitive Tonys plus an honorary one for the 4 actresses alternating in the lead role, as well as a record-breaking 7 Olivier Awards. Since the musical premiered, the movie's cast has reunited to the merriment of millennials everywhere, and sales of the original book, which was always a bestseller, have increased sharply. Over 17 million copies of the novel had been sold as of Matilda's 30th birthday in October 2018, and it has now become the best-selling of all Dahl's books. Today we celebrate the character Chelsea Philpott of Slate calls the bookish heroine who is still an inspiration to the quiet girls. But first, our newbie Grisel will not so quietly tell us what Matilda is all about.
Matilda is the story of a little girl born to horrible parents who treat her horribly. She has a horrible brother, and she goes to a horrible school where a horrible headmistress does horrible things. Everyone is horrible except for Miss Honey and a couple of nice kids who accept Matilda just as she is. Fueled by all the horribleness, Matilda's feelings of injustice give birth to telekinesis. Shenanigans ensue, and justice is served.
That is a non-horrible synopsis, Grisel. Well done.
Thank you.
And with that, we can move into our brand new segment. Before we dive into our origin stories, I am extremely excited to introduce the Bluestocking Circle's first ever guest, Monica. Yay! Monica is a longtime listener and longer time friend. Thank you so much for being our first guest, Monica. We're so happy to have you here. What would you like our listeners to know about you?
This is my very first podcast. Needless to say, I'm also very excited. So I'm a technical writer by day, an avid audiobook reader, in quotations, by night, and a shameless tea consumer always. I should point out that I do listen to a lot of audiobooks because I spend the majority of my time reading and writing, and I don't want to read books at night. I know.
That's okay.
The thing about audiobooks is that apparently my ears can hear a lot faster than my eyes can see, because I've been able to speed read so many audiobooks that at the time of this recording, I have, in quotations, read 27 audiobooks, which I'm very excited about.
Wow.
I know, I'm so excited. I'm not sure if we're segueing into the Geek Girl origins or not yet, but My geek girl origins, or at least my awakenings to the fact that I might be a geek, started way back in 1998, which seems both like it was yesterday, but also a really long time ago. And that was with my coming in contact with anime in the form of Sailor Moon. My younger brother and I would get up every morning very early just so we could watch one episode of Sailor Moon and one episode of Pokemon and shove a great deal of cereal into our mouths right before we had to head out for school. And that is when I fell in love with Sailor Moon, and I think kind of came to terms with the fact that I might be a geek girl, and I liked it a lot.
So that sounds kind of similar to my origin story, except I'm getting the impression that you were a lot younger than I was in 1998. So same, but older.
Monica, you get to be the first ever recipient of our pop culture pop quiz, which we introduced in our last minisode. You've heard that minisode already, right?
Yes.
Good, so you know what to expect. There are 3 questions in this quiz, as you know, but we'll take them one at a time. Are you ready?
Yes, ma'am.
Question number 1. What are your favorite fandoms?
So I think I have too many, and they run very deep. So at the risk of being here for hours, I will say what I am currently obsessing over. And that would be Jane the Virgin, The Good Place, Game of Thrones, both the books and TV show. This new book series, Nevermore, there's 2 books out currently. The Paddington books, which I love so very, very much and encourage everyone to read. And I am so very sorry, B, but my latest obsession is the Parasol Protectorate series.
We all know how B feels about Soulless.
But you make up for it with your love of Jane the Virgin and The Good Place. Question number 2. Who was your OTP?
So that would be Sophie and Howl, but from the film. I'm not a huge fan of the book version.
I kind of like them both, but I can see why the film one resonates more.
It's a little bit more romantic.
Yeah, I would say so.
To each her own. Question number 3. Who are some of your favorite heroines?
I absolutely love Anne of Green Gables. She is a kindred spirit in my mind. I also love Batgirl, the Barbara Gordon iteration, Agent Carter, Bridget Jones, and at the risk of sounding basic, I really like Princess Leia.
I am so basic, I'm there with you.
I think you two might be the same person.
We might be.
There's nothing wrong with that.
Well, thank you for taking our pop culture pop quiz, Monica. Excellent responses all around. And with that, we can go into our origin stories. This is both my Matilda origin story and my fangirl origin story, as you'll hear in a moment. Matilda the book was a gift I received around the time I was in kindergarten. I could already read by then, so I read it all by myself, and I found my first kindred spirit, a quiet, bookish, brown-haired, and secretly mischievous little girl like me. It became my first favorite novel, as I said in the last minisode, and I loved it so much that I read all of Roald Dahl's other children's books and considered him my favorite author as a kid. When the movie was released, I was still in elementary school, and I remember marking the release date on my calendar and counting down the days until I could see it. It's the first movie I remember waiting for, and it's my first memory of watching a film adaptation after reading the book, since I had seen the movies of my other childhood favorites before reading those books. Fortunately, I loved the movie as a kid, and I used to rewatch it all the time on VHS, but I hadn't seen it since I was a child until now. And I have to add one more thing. I don't know if you two noticed this, but on page 97 of my edition, when Miss Honey goes to the Wormwood's house to talk about Matilda, Mrs. Wormwood tells her, and I quote, "I'm not in favor of Bluestocking girls." Did you catch that?
I did catch that. I did stop for a moment, but I read an ebook, so I don't know what page it was.
I had an audiobook, but I did hear that distinctly.
Yeah, I was so happy to read that. So apparently Matilda is also my Bluestocking origin story. The last time I read the book was years before the podcast, so this was the first time reading it that I noticed that.
I had never read the book, nor had I seen the musical. But I remember watching the film as a child, and like you, I was attracted to the character by her sense of hope and justice, and just a twinge of rebellion. In fact, I think Matilda was my introduction to the precocious child trope, because I like things like that, and I thought I would add that in there. Before my rewatch of the movie, I remember most keenly the aesthetic of the film, which was very of the 90s, and also very whimsical, which in hindsight is probably what set me up to love things like Pushing Daisies and other shows that had very whimsical aesthetics.
That's an astute observation, Monica.
Yes.
Maybe you just explained my entire preference for every TV show ever.
Quite possibly.
That's it. The podcast is over. We have found her raison d'etre. That's it. We're done.
I also remember Matilda's voracious appetite for books, and unfortunately, what I remember most keenly is the Trunchbull's Chokey. That is the stuff of nightmares.
I feel like the most memorable scene for myself was always that chocolate cake, which, watching it now, is kind of gross as a scene, so...
I think it's kind of delicious. I'm
I
not
think
gonna
so,
lie.
too.
But the way it was portrayed with, like, The cook who comes in, I kind of got a little bit revolted. But I don't have any particularly strong feelings towards this story. I did see the movie as a kid. I think I was like maybe 11 or so when it came out. I don't actually even remember if I saw this at home or in theaters. Somehow I was exposed to this movie, and I really enjoyed it. But, as I've said countless times before, I did not love children's books or the middle grade books that were available when I was a kid, so I didn't particularly care for Roald Dahl. I read Charlie and the Chocolate Factory because it was forced upon me, and that was about it. So, that's where you have me. I don't have any really strong feelings about Matilda, but we'll see.
I have strong feelings.
Ooh, let's get to them then. Are those strong feelings referring to the book?
Yes and no. I have positive, strong feelings about the book. The other two properties, one is a bit mixed, and one is decidedly not positive.
Oh no. Well, before we get to that, I want to know what you two thought of the book, because this was the first time you both read it.
It was for me, and for Monica as well.
Yes.
So, I think I'm going to break your heart now, and I'm so sorry because I know you love this, but I found it so tedious.
Oh no.
I think that you should invest in audiobooks because...
I tried. It was checked out, and I couldn't get it, and I was very upset. It arrived after I had already read the book, and I was like, well, now it's too late.
Well, you know what? That's true, and I think that's a testament to just how popular these books are. I had to wait for mine for a very long time, so much so that I didn't think I was going to get all my quote-unquote homework done before this podcast. But mercifully, it came in time, and I had the very pleasant experience of listening to the audiobook as read by Kate Winslet.
Yes, I saw.
Who is amazing.
She sounded like it would be really...
She really is, and I think that was part of it. I find her incredibly amazing to listen to, and I think it's a testament to both the writing of Roald Dahl, but also her incredible acting ability.
So did she actually act out the voices, or did she just narrate? 'Cause I always get annoyed with the narrators who strictly just read, and I prefer the ones that do the voices.
She does the voices. Okay. In fact, spoiler alert, Miss Honey and the Trunchbull are Scottish.
Oh, cool.
Or perhaps Northern England, but they have
Yorkshire or something like
yeah,
that?
Yeah. Yes, like in the Secret Garden.
I'm intrigued. Mm-hmm. I might give the audiobook a try.
I think you should. And hands down, my greatest compliment to the book is also a compliment to the author, and that's that he doesn't dumb things down for kids. What I've noticed a lot, because I am a big fan of both young adult fiction and children's fiction, is that children's fiction nowadays kind of tends to make things easy, or it dumps things down. And I find that books, and I don't know if it's a function of British versus American authors or books from a time before versus more modern books, they just don't make them like they used to, at the risk of sounding really old. You know, there's just difficult words in the books. There's words like gormless. God, I love the word gormless.
It's a good word.
It's a good word. Apparently it means dim-witted.
Yes.
And they just kept using it, and I thought, God, that's a great word. I also find it hilarious at his insistence on using the word damn, like damn well, or you better turn the damn thing off. At one point, Miss Honey is arguing with Mr. Wormwood because she wants to speak to him about his amazing daughter, and he's watching the TV, and she's just telling him, well, you better turn the damn thing off.
Really?
Yes.
I'm wondering if that's an audiobook thing, because in my version of the book, she says it just like the movie. She says, turn that darn thing off. Do you think they softened it for Americans, maybe? Because I have the American edition of the book, but maybe Kate Winslet was reading the British version.
It's entirely possible.
It could be, yeah. Because it could be American Puritanism, and that one word as a swear word and inappropriateness or something.
That's a fair assessment. I think that Roald Dahl was fairly well known as a curmudgeon, and I can just see him trailing off those words, not really caring who his target audience is. I mean, I can see him just saying that in front of, or even to a
It's
child.
also just so very British. So.
When she said it in the film, she did say darn, and she kind of flinches at even saying the word darn. I thought, man, that's a huge difference. It's a world apart from, and maybe it is because it was softened for American audiences. Maybe not the MPAA of the 90s, but certainly in today's MPAA, that would get you at least a PG-13 saying that word right there, I think. I don't know. They're a mystery.
Actually, one of the funny things I found when I was watching the film is that to me it was a little bit of an anachronism, even though I had seen the film first, that it was American, that everybody was American, because in my head this was a British story, and for whatever reason I kept imagining that I had seen this as a British story, and I was like, well, what's up with their voices? I don't know what's happening here.
Well, that's a good transition. Let's talk about the movie. What did you think, among other things, about the transition from the British to an American setting?
I found it a little strangely off-putting. And I don't know why. I think in my mind I had superimposed this very British family into it. I don't know what I was on when I was a child. And I think I just liked watching a lot of British films and kind of started superimposing these accents and convoluted this into Roald Dahl. I was like, all British all the time.
I did not know who Roald Dahl was when I saw Matilda.
Really?
So Matilda, I came in completely fresh, just watching the movie, loving it, and now watching it or rewatching it as an adult, I can say I have such an appreciation for the adult actors in the film. Danny DeVito is amazing. Rhea Perlman, that line, babies, you're better off just raising tomatoes. I don't know, it gets me every time. And Pam Ferris as the Trunchbull is so absolutely amazing.
She's terrifying. She is so good in that role.
She is terrifying. She's so good at being terrifying that she's also Aunt Marge in Harry Potter.
Oh, that's right.
Yes. And
She
also
is.
my beloved sister Evangelina in Call the Midwife, which is...
Yes, which was so nice.
Yes. But she has that kind of
she's
like
got that face.
rough around the edges thing.
Yes.
So I really enjoyed the acting in that movie.
Danny DeVito was also the director.
Oh, yes.
He was a narrator, which I found interesting.
I didn't like that. I thought it was a bit tonally jarring to have Mr. Wormwood serve as a narrator.
Yes.
I didn't even think about that.
I don't know. I would have liked a British narrator. Maybe a Jude Law, like a Lemony Snicket, A Series of Unfortunate Events. Maybe Jude Law could have been a good narrator.
Maybe not Jude Law.
Okay, maybe
How
not Jude Law.
old would Jude Law have been back
Maybe
then?
a
He
1990s
was not
equivalent
Jude
of Jude
Law
Law.
then, I don't think.
I
That was like pre-Gattaca, even.
I can't speak anything else about Jude Law without going into an Albus Dumbledore rant, which I will not get into right now.
Oh, we don't speak about those.
Haven't seen, don't want to. I will say that the 90s aesthetic that you mentioned earlier also kind of threw me off.
It was so 90s.
Because again, for whatever reason, I kept thinking this was set way back when. And I'm like, what were my memories of this movie? I don't understand.
Are you sure it's Matilda you're thinking of?
I had the movie. I know I watched it a bunch of times. I don't know what I was really watching. I don't know. I have no idea what happened to me.
Does it hold up?
I think so. I liked it.
I had mixed feelings about it. I found it, at least, it's probably just myself. I feel like I either grew out of it. I remember watching it not too long ago, as I said in the minisode, at least in the last 10 years. I know I've seen it. I realized, as I was thinking back and trying to figure it out, that I have seen it mostly in Spanish, on Telemundo, because they play it all the time, and my mother will always be watching it.
I like that you've seen it in Spanish and that you're picturing Britain.
I don't
in the
know, like I
1950s.
said, I don't know what's going on here. But strange, weird experience with Matilda. I don't know, it didn't quite hold up for me.
Well, Grisel, I kind of agree with you this time. You know, I'm a big proponent of children's works and children's films and all of that, but this movie did not have that classic quality that I think other children's films do, like, say, Mary Poppins, for example, or the 1993 Secret Garden, both of which I think are masterpieces that can be appreciated at any level. This is a movie that I probably won't rewatch again unless I have a child with me. It doesn't really hold up for an adult viewing audience, unfortunately. However, that being said, I think it's a great children's movie, and I would absolutely recommend it to anyone who is a child or who's watching it with a child. But it does lose something, I think, from that adult perspective. And I don't think I'm jaded. I think it's just that this movie is somehow different compared to the works.
I like that you have to defend the fact that you're not jaded.
I think I have a sense of childlike whimsy, but this movie did not exactly stand up, I think, as well as I hoped it would.
I think it has some very good, memorable scenes, and I
Yes.
would rewatch those. But as a whole, I don't think I need to watch it from beginning to end.
No, like Monica pointed out, some of the performances are surprisingly strong.
Mm-hmm.
Really good, but it's a children's film, not a family film, I think. It's very much a children's film.
Yes, I would agree. Although that music does take me back to 1996.
Oh, man.
Right, so thoughts on the musical before we move on to our usual segments.
Is this the hate rant? Come on.
Oh,
No, I'm saving that for
Catharsis
Feminist
Corner?
Rant and Catharsis Corner, yes. So I actually watched the musical almost Tabula Rasa. I hadn't seen the movie in a long time and I had not read the book, so I thought, let's do the musical first. I had heard, a little birdie told me, that it was the most different from the other properties. So I thought, okay, let's start here. I initially had mixed feelings when I first started listening to it, but the longer I listened to it, and I think it might also be a function of the particular recording I listened to, which didn't include the dialogue in between the songs, and it even missed some of the songs, so I had to go back to listen to them out of order.
just to clarify, we heard the London cast recording, all of us did.
Yes, the Royal Shakespeare Company version is the one I listened to.
The proper accent.
If it's good enough for Shakespeare. My biggest issues had to do with the portrayal of some of the characters, specifically the portrayal of Miss Honey. and Miss Trunchbull. But as I said before, I think I'm going to speak at length during the feminist rant and Catharsis Corner about these issues.
I look forward to hearing your thoughts. Crystal, is there anything you want to add at this point?
I feel like I need to see it in order to get a real sense of this musical. As just the music, I didn't love it, but maybe if I saw it, which is kind of what I've heard about The Cursed Child. So I'm going to put it up there with The Cursed Child as a thing.
No.
Or maybe if I saw it, I would appreciate it, but as a product of words, I did not.
So, because you mentioned that, I just have to say, I was a little bit perturbed. I did do some reading about this, and I learned that this musical actually had the most Olivier awards until it was surpassed. It was surpassed by The Cursed Child. And that really pisses me off because I've read that and that's obviously not a musical. At least I don't think it is.
It's not.
It's not.
Well, I read it.
I don't know. There might be a musical number for all we know.
This is a rant we don't need to go through, but I'm just going to put it in there in case you choose to include it. It read like a fan fiction, and I will never ever forgive them, and I'm walking away from this slowly now.
I am 100% on your side, Monica. We do not speak of The Cursed Child. They ruined Voldemort Day for us all.
I don't know. Tony and Olivier will be rolling in their graves right now.
I have heard, however, that it is impressive to watch. The story sucks. The story is nonsense.
So like a train wreck.
But visually, I guess they do some really interesting stuff.
Okay. Can't they do that interesting stuff with something that's not Harry Potter? Leave our poor favorites alone. Going back to the Matilda musical, I really enjoyed the songs and I really enjoyed the lyrics. I was a little bit skeptical when I read the Wikipedia entry. I agree with you, Rousseau. I think I might need to see it on stage to get the full effect. But hearing the cast recording alone, I felt the music matched the book tonally. I enjoyed a lot of the songs. I really enjoyed the lyrics. I thought they were very clever, and especially, for example, I'm Here and Quiet and Naughty and Revolting Children, the children's-based ones. I think you said that to me before the recording, Monica.
Yes, the children's ones, they are spot on. The Revolting Children one is so good. It is what every musical should have, that kind of a song. I love the playing of the words, children in revolt, but also because the Trunchbull thinks they're revolting, and the stories. Those are the songs I had to go back, so I didn't listen to them in the correct order, but it just made me think, my God, that must be so magical on stage because it was so lovely to listen to.
And the circus imagery they incorporate as well. That must be something to behold.
Can I just stop and say I love the word escapologist?
Did you see the Tony's performance of Revolting Children?
I did not.
It's really good, but I have to say, I saw some of the other songs performed at different venues, and I wasn't as impressed with the others. So I don't know if I would like this if I saw it on stage, but I'm definitely willing to go. I would love to go see it.
I did see also the Revolting Children, so maybe. I don't know. Maybe I would actually pay to see it, just to get the feel for it.
Any other thoughts we have before we move on to our usual segments?
No.
Then let's move on to Ship Wars. I don't expect this will be a long segment since this isn't a shippable work. As a 2005 New Yorker article about Roald Dahl titled The Candyman stated, quote, "There is no hint of sex or even romance in Dahl's children's books," end quote. Maybe that's why I, notorious disliker of kissing books, liked them so much as a kid. However, are there any relationships of any type in Matilda that you would like to discuss?
There's a lot of relationships not to emulate in this story.
There are?
Especially the parents. All the parents are terrible. Don't have children if you're those parents.
I disagree.
Go ahead.
I think that the acrobat and escapologist, that...
If I may interject, those are Miss Honey's parents for those of us who haven't seen the musical.
Miss Honey's parents in the musical iteration, although they don't get to be parents for very long in the musical, the one thing that they think is missing from their lives is in fact to have a child. So although it's not the necessarily most realistic portrayal of parenthood, it is one in which they feel love toward a child. And I think had they been given a chance to show proper love to their child, and, the escapologist does to an extent in the time he has with his daughter, they're not bad parents. They haven't been given a chance.
I feel like I blanked out so much on the musical and have no idea what you're talking about. But all I remember is, wasn't her dad a doctor in the books? Is that one of the things they changed?
Yes, it is. They have an entire additional storyline where they make Miss Honey's parents circus performers in the musical. That's one of the big changes. Another big change is that they have Matilda sort of clairvoyantly or retro-clairvoyantly be able to tell that that's Miss Honey's backstory without realizing that she's saying Miss Honey's backstory to the librarian.
Yeah, that was weird.
That was extremely weird. That's one of those changes that I read and I'm like, I don't know if I like this. I don't know if this works. I imagine it's visually stunning because they're circus performers and I'm picturing sort of like Cirque du Soleil performers in front of you while she's telling the story. But that's one of those things about the musical that I don't know if I would like.
I concur.
I'm assuming then the murder plot is eliminated overall.
Oh, it's definitely there.
Okay.
It's a different murder plot.
Is Miss Trunchbull meant to be a circus performer in the musical too, do you think?
She could be. She could be like a lifting lady.
That's right. She could be the strong woman.
She has a hilarious interlude in the middle of The Smell of Rebellion about imagine a cabin in the woods. The horses. She starts imitating horses. Do you know what I'm talking about in the middle of the song?
I think I must have blocked that out.
I blocked out so much.
There's a lot, as I said, that I did not
There
care
were a lot
for.
of singing children, and that's all I remember.
But I will tell you this. So the murder plot is there. I know this is segueing from Ship Wars terribly.
Well, this kind of still goes into Ship Wars. All the ships not to do. Don't murder the people.
It's a type of love, right? So the murder, I think I prefer the murder plot, if you can prefer a murder plot in the musical, because it doesn't shed the parents in a bad light. So this is, again, we gave the spoiler warning already, but one's an acrobat and the other one's an escapologist, and they never quite say what happens to the father. He kind of just disappears. But the mother is basically, I think,
The ultimate escape.
it's almost like Robin's parents in Batman, that she's on trapeze and she falls. But anyway, in the book and in the film, they make it look like her father committed suicide, which really bothers me. I had forgotten that about the story. So the order was musical, book, movie. And then when I read the book or listened to the book, I thought, oh my God, that's terrible in a kid's book. But they show it. They say it in the movie. And they say it so quickly, it's like, oh, you didn't really think he committed suicide? No, whatever. They don't even say suicide. They say he killed himself. But even then, that's pretty jarring.
It's pretty dark.
It's super dark.
It's like you said, he doesn't hold back because he's writing for children. He writes the story the way he thinks it should be, and if suicide is a part of it, then suicide is a part of it.
Fair enough.
I actually don't remember. I remember watching it when I was 11 or whatever, and knowing that there was a murder plot, but I don't remember the suicide plot. So when I read the book, and my order was book, movie, musical, I was like, what? How? It was a little jarring to me. The other strange thing I found about the movie, and this might just be me reading into the directorial decisions made in this film. So there's this moment when Matilda and Miss Honey meet, and they do this like pull away shot, and it goes a little bit fuzzy, and they do this like staring into each other's eyes thing, and I was like, what am I watching? Why did they do this scene like this? Because I can get the small child who's had this horrible upbringing with these terrible parents who've neglected her for life, suddenly finding an adult who is loving and kind and cares for her, and she probably sees something in her that she's never seen before. But it was like this weird romance meet cute thing.
Oh, no.
And I was like, why?
That is decidedly not what I got from that. And
That was all that I got from it. And I was like, I need to stop now and walk away.
So the way I interpreted it is, this movie, I see it through the eyes of a child. And when you're a child, you tend to look up to grown-ups and everything is idealized. So this scene where, you're right, they kind of like, smooth the edges and everything.
They made it very blurry.
There's like a little halo and everything. But I think that's because they're showing, Miss Honey herself, not so much in the books, but definitely in the musical and in the movie, she's very childlike. So
yes, I did. I did pick up on that too.
Right. Mm-hmm. So when they see each other, I almost think that they see a little bit of each other. It's almost like looking in a mirror, and they're recognizing a kindred spirit. And dare I quote Anne of Green Gables, they found a bosom friend in one another. And I can't believe that this is the first time I say bosom friend out loud.
How did it feel?
A little weird. Bosom is kind of a weird word. It kind of buzzes on your lips. But I digress.
I think what you're seeing, Grisel, is the visual language of cinema to indicate that these two people share a bond. And the problem is that we usually only see bonds in film in a romantic sense. So this language used to indicate there's a bond between these two people has sort of been co-opted by romantic relationships to the point that when we see what is clearly a non-romantic relationship, we start sort of sensing that connotation because we've been habituated to it. What I want to say is that I would like to point out the most important and very platonic relationships in young Matilda's life, aside from that with her books, are her, again, very platonic relationships with her librarian, Mrs. Phelps, and her teacher, Miss Honey. My shipper's contribution this time is therefore a thank you to all the librarians and teachers out there who have made a difference in our lives. I'm going to close this segment with a call to action in their honor. Education and librarianship are the professions that shape our society by guiding our children into adulthood. And I feel very strongly about that. So support your local schools and teachers and libraries and librarians, and the next time they're on your ballot, get out there, go to the polls, and vote in their favor, platonically. And that's my personal feminist rant. So if there are no other Ship Wars thoughts,
nope, none here,
then we can move on to our feminist rant properly. So I'll begin by saying that Roald Dahl was not a noted feminist. In fact, a lot of the Matilda movie reviews, even back in 1996, which surprised me, but they called him out on this and other, shall we say, issues that he had, such as his self-proclaimed anti-Semitism. For example, Roger Ebert opened his review rather bluntly by stating that, quote, Roald Dahl was by all accounts a singularly unpleasant person, end quote. And Janet Maslin wrote about the, quote, staggering Dahl misogyny, end quote, that underlies his work in her review for the New York Times. More recently, a 2016 BBC article titled The Dark Side of Roald Dahl stated, quote, take a closer look at Dahl's writing for children and you'll find something to offend almost everyone, end quote. And it noted in particular that his female characters, and again this is a quote from the article, but his female characters tend to be either warm or wicked with nothing in between. We've talked before about the quandary and ethics of separating the art from the artist, and that certainly is at play here, I think. I'm going to post the BBC article in the show notes for those fellow Matilda fans who want some major cognitive dissonance. But what are your thoughts?
I kind of actually feel the same way now that you read that quote. So I know that Miss Honey is presented as a great character and, a loving person who's a wonderful influence in this little girl's life. But I found her to be a caricature of an idealized woman and did not really like the character overall. Similarly, in the same way that I didn't particularly like the depiction of motherhood, other people in the story. Like, there are no characters who are neither completely good or completely wicked. Like, there's nobody in the middle. They're either all bad or all good, and the all good is too good for me, and the all bad is just too dramatic for me.
Well, you just said broke my heart regarding not liking Miss Honey, but I agree that she is described as purely good. He uses the word Madonna to describe her at one point. So
I kept getting, and I had said I found the book tedious for a lot of different reasons, but one of them being that every time Miss Honey is described, the woman does not eat. She lives on bread and margarine and has one lunch a day, which, how many calories could they possibly be feeding the children in this school? So that kept annoying me because it's this idea of, like, she's so poor, she's living in, it was an idealization of the poverty that she lives in as this, like, sacrificial lamb.
I disagree.
And I hated it.
Oh, I disagree. I don't think it's a sacrificial lamb thing. And I'm going to try and keep this as short as possible because I do really just want to get it out there for the catharsis corner. I don't think it was a sacrificial lamb thing. But I think her suffering is used as a foil against the Trunchbull. So, I think
it is. I don't disagree with that. But it is that exactly. She's just a foil. Like, I didn't see her as a fully realized character, but neither did I see Trunchbull as a fully realized character. They are just characters in the sense of, like, here is this personification of all the good things, here's the personification of all the bad things, and somewhere this little girl is caught between them. I actually ended up finding Miss Honey more disturbing overall than Trunchbull because I was not as bothered by, like, oh, here's this horrible woman, but I was more bothered by, here's this woman who is basically living with her abuser her whole life and can't ever get away from her and is living in a little hut in the middle of the woods with no electricity and no food and still is living with her abuser who is her boss. There was a lot about that relationship that I found most disturbing.
I have so many issues with that.
Miss Honey is Rapunzel. Miss Honey is a fairy tale character. The imagery that's used with her is very much in lines of a fairy tale. She has the cottage in the middle of the woods, covered in flowers,
she
just
has
like Snow White.
In the book.
She does have a shed.
They call it a cottage, even though it's a shed.
It's a cottage in the movie.
It's very much that Snow White sort of Rapunzel imagery. She was trapped out her life. Cinderella, Snow White, Miss Honey. You can put them all together. So I do think that is intentional. However, I'm going to say that even though I agree with your point that Miss Honey is all good and Trunchbull is all evil, Matilda breaks the mold. Matilda's neither all good nor all bad. She's sort of the midpoint. She's a complex character. She's a naughty girl. She breaks the rules. She is going against the instructions that she receives. She goes against the adults in her life. She fights back.
She does go against all the horrible people.
And I think I would add that some of the other children as well. Hortensia does naughty things, but she's good to her fellow students. And so is Lavender. She's the one that has the plan to put the newt in the jug. But she doesn't call out her friends. She wouldn't do that.
I agree with what you're saying. And I think it's what you were saying earlier as well, that it's because it's through the children's eyes. The children are very complex because they're interacting with each other on a peer level. These adults, they're further away. Even Miss Honey, she's a position of authority. She's an adult. She's the other. So they're not as complex because the children can't get to know them as well as they can get to know each other.
I completely agree. I think and I can speak from experience that as you grow older, I would imagine most adults see things less as black and white and more as gray. And it would make sense for the actions of the children to seem more gray because they're each other's peers. But when you're seeing the adults, you're really only seeing one aspect of that. And that's whatever is most pronounced to the children. So I do have one more feminist rant that's not book or movie related, but it is very specifically musically related, and that is the portrayal of the Trunchbull as a man. And I'm kind of going to formulate it as a question. So, what does the character of the Trunchbull being played by a man say about women who may be unfeminine or traditionally masculine? And even more so, what does it say about that character that is being played up for laughs in the musical?
I didn't know that.
Yes, it's a role played by a man consistently in all performances. Bertie Carvel, I think is his name. He played the role originally, and he received many awards for his performance as the Trunchbull. And I was hearing some interviews, they said that the reason they always pictured a man for this role, they never envisioned it as a woman to begin with, is because supposedly you can't find a woman who's physically imposing enough to be the Trunchbull. Are you kidding me? Have you seen the movie?
I just made a face.
Have they seen Pam Ferris? She is the personification. She plays that role so perfectly. You can't find someone like that who can also sing and dance.
So I mentioned I'm a Game of Thrones fan. If you ever see the woman whose name escapes me now, but she plays Brienne of Tarth. I mean, she's a beautiful woman, mind you. But with a little Gwendolyn Christie, yes. She is a very tall, very broad-shouldered woman. And I think, she's played villains. She played the name in Star Wars. She's one of the villains.
She plays Phasma.
Yes, Captain Phasma.
I can't see her face, but
she's very...
It's her body.
She's pretty imposing. And, there's no reason why they can't get screen actors to play Broadway actors. Actually, fun fact, one of the young women who played Matilda in the prior to West End portrayal of her was actually the young woman who played the little Baratheon girl in the TV show. So they've picked from Game of Thrones before. I said I was a Game of Thrones fan. Full disclosure.
Just throwing those out there.
Monica, it sounds like you're getting ready for Catharsis Corner.
I'm ready.
Go for it.
It's not unusual for musicals to have men playing women. In fact, one of my favorites is Hairspray, and the role of the mother is notoriously played by a man, and sometimes for laughs because it is a comedy, but it's done with love. And in this one, again, not having seen it, having only heard it, I didn't feel that way. And this also kind of transitions me into my issue with the portrayal of the Trunchbull in general. When I read the book, especially the book, but also in the film, when you hear people calling the Trunchbull a monster, you feel it. She's a monster. She did horrible things. And it's played up for laughs a little bit in the film, but in the musical, the juxtaposition is jarring because you hear about the Trunchbull. Those of us who are familiar with it recognize the role of the, I believe, sister of the acrobat in the stories, and how truly monstrous she is. But then every time that the actor playing the Trunchbull is on stage, it's just ridiculous. So it's so jarring. You don't believe the monstrosity.
It's comedic.
And you can be comedic. I mean, look at the movie. We made fun of her. I did.
I was quaking.
She was kind of scary.
At the end, with the nude and her superstition and running about the house. But it's earned. It's not throughout. And she's allowed to be a monster, and you're allowed to quake because she's scary. But I never really...
She has flaws. So she is a monster, but you know that there are those flaws which are expected of anyone.
Right. Mm-hmm. And then I too had issues with the portrayal of Miss Honey in the musical specifically. I think the book was the best portrayal of it. And I just want to read a quote really quickly that kind of differentiates, the lack of a better way of saying it, differentiates how different they are in the musical and in the show. And that's that she spends an entire song in the musical talking about how pathetic she is, that she can't even bring herself to knock on the door of her aunt's door to say, hey, put Matilda in a higher level, when in the book she is in fact, quote, wildly excited, unquote, to do so. In fact, normally Miss Honey was terrified, but at that moment she felt ready to take on just about anybody. That is such an incredible distinction, and of all of the properties, I feel like Miss Honey is the most adult-like and in possession of herself, it's in the book, than in any of the other ones. She is so incredibly childlike and pathetic in the musical, and I just really dislike that.
I agree that her internal monologue in that song is quite a bit more downtrodden than it is in the other versions. Do you think it's also a product of the fact that the musical is about 3 hours long compared to, an hour and a half for the movie? And what's a relatively short book? So they had to give her more of an arc so that she starts more from a position of weakness in the musical so she can build on that throughout the musical and get to a position of strength at the end. Whereas in the book, she stays fairly constant throughout.
It's a 2.5-hour audiobook, so there's only a half an hour difference. If we want to get mathematical. No. I just think that this was Minchin? Is that his name? Tim Minchin?
Tim Minchin.
Tim
Yes.
Minchin's interpretation of this particular character, and that's fine. Creative license. But it kind of highlighted why I think Roald Dahl was so averse to people adapting his work.
Yes, he hated the adaptations of his works.
I hadn't really thought about this, but it just came to my mind. One of the things that I also found disturbing about the juxtaposition between Trunchbull and Miss Honey was the very stereotypical use of Trunchbull's physicality to signal her evilness. Mm-hmm. Which is very much like, here you have Ursula, evil because fat. And there's like this equation of thinness with goodness and largeness with evilness. And I think this book super played that up.
Oh, that's true.
And
Mrs. Wormwood as well.
Yes, she's fat. She's described as, like being very obsessed with her looks and all she cares about. And it's brought up multiple times, like the greed, the eating, it's always tied to a negative trait. Like, you can't possibly be a good person and not be of a certain size.
If you're a woman.
Because
there's Bruce.
That's true.
But do they talk about Bruce's size?
They do.
They do. He's described, in the way in which he's described is, you get the impression that he's a large boy of some sort.
He's a Gustus Gloop.
Yeah.
Oh, that's true.
Yeah.
I think I did read about that. I don't know if final rant, but one of the biggest things that kind of bothered me, this is going to sound almost petty, but one of my serious issues with the book and musical is that Miss Honey lives in a shed. Of all of the many things that they mention in the story that I think were most designed for children is the fact that she just signs over her salary to this lady who's basically her abuser, like Roselle said. And it's not an issue. Oh, it's totally believable. Yeah, I just sit here and I eat a lot of margarine because I can't afford to live a regular life.
Little, camp light thing.
I just can't as an adult, because I think that would, if someone is signing a contract and they're coerced, that's got to be illegal in some way. So that didn't wash over me like I think it might have as a child. And also, I have this incredible love for the cottage in the movies, which I found a lot more believable. She lives on a farm, and there's bees, and it's amazing. And there's nothing more that I wanted in this world than to own that cottage.
Right?
And to be woken up by woodland creatures. Okay, I'm talking about the woodland creatures, but, I was actually a little depressed as a child when they have to move into the larger Honey Manor.
I agree with you.
Where's the cottage? Why aren't we keeping the cottage?
I wanted to live in Miss Honey's cottage. It was so charming.
It was charming, and they had tea. They can keep all of their cartwheels in the living room. I wanted tea in the cottage.
But not the shed.
But not the shed.
Grisel, is there anything you want to catharsis?
So my one main catharsis, and I feel it's just to wrap up my earlier statement, what I found most tedious about this book in some ways was the increasingly purple prose, which I know is one of the things that people love about this book.
What
Yes,
is
This is
that,
the
by
thing
the
I
way?
hated the most. Purple
Anne of
prose
Green
is
Gables.
when...
Everything.
No.
The way she talks. Yes.
Well, yes, the way she talks, not the book itself.
No.
Purple prose is when you start using a lot of alliteration, a lot of flowery language to describe something, and pretty much you're using 20 words to say something very simple.
Very
I see no problem
romantic.
with this.
It is very romantic. So I could not. It is that very old-fashioned style of literature for kids, which is the kind that I never liked. So it just was not my thing. And that's why I found it kind of hard to get through this book, because I kept having to put it down because I just could not handle that we would have, especially with Trunchbull. There was a lot of Trunchbullianisms, which was like, the spoiled brat, the annoying lart. That's not even a word I'm just speaking.
Well, a spoonful of sugar helps the medicine go down.
You know how I feel about that one. It was a lot for me.
I love the language. Did it work better for you in song any chance? Because the lyrics were pretty
The
wordy
lyrics
too.
were okay. That's why I was like, maybe if I saw this. The movie kind of uses it a little bit sometimes in the way she speaks, and I don't mind it as much there because it's being acted. And I think also it's because of how the actress carries it. And though she is terrifying, it fits her well, and the role she plays is well played. So it doesn't bother me as much in the film, especially when like her and Danny DeVito are like interacting when he's selling her the car and stuff like that. It doesn't bother me as much. But reading it in the book, I was like, yeah, this is why I never liked this writer when I was a kid.
Aw, that makes me sad, Crystal. He was my favorite, as I said.
I know.
And I used to love the way he narrates his stories.
I'm sorry.
He breaks the fourth wall so often as well. I thought you would enjoy the beginning when he's talking about what he would do if he was evaluating students.
Oh, yes.
It was so sharp.
It had its moments. Like, it had its moments where I was like, oh, that's cute. And in the beginning, I was like, okay, this is okay. And then I was like, oh, God, it just keeps going.
I feel like it's very British, though.
It is very British, and I don't
Which is a
always love
compliment.
it.
Oh, darn.
Well, I have a confession this time, not so much catharsis, and I'm only saying it because Roald Dahl is no longer with us. If he was and he heard this by any miraculous chance, I think it would kill him. And that is that I like the ending of the movie Matilda more than I liked the ending of the book Matilda when I was a little girl, even though it was my favorite book. And the reason for that, for those of you who haven't read the book, is that in the book, she loses her powers at the end. In the movie, she keeps them. You see her making the book float across the room at the end of the movie, but in the book, because she's sufficiently stimulated by being passed on to a higher grade level, she no longer uses her extra brain power, which is the explanation in the book, to make objects move and to do all the telekinetic stuff she does. So what did you think of that? Of the ending of the book versus the movie?
I thought that the explanation they give her, your mind is now fully stimulated and you don't need the magic anymore, was kind of like the adult version of explaining it. I felt that the real reason was because she no longer has to met out justice because this horrible wrong has been righted. So I felt that her telekinesis was really the result of all these terrible things. And now that she's happy, she doesn't need to do this. Maybe if she sees injustice again, they'll come back.
I miss the miracles in the book, and I don't want to make people think I was an angry child, but I related a lot more to the being angry and wanting to do something about it than the I am just not stimulated in class, let me draw this doodle over here, or maybe I'll move the chalk across the board. So I am a little disappointed at the book's ending as well.
What did you think of the extra prank the book has? The parrots in the chimney?
I don't think I got to that part.
Really?
I don't think the audiobook has that. What parrot in the chimney?
Maybe they did it.
Oh, wait! I'm thinking at the end. Yes!
No, in the beginning. Middle-ish.
Rattle my bones. Rattle my bones.
I always wondered why they didn't put that in the movie, and then I figured maybe they didn't want kids stuffing bird cages up chimneys.
Maybe we should provide some context to the listeners.
Maybe I should. One of Matilda's pranks in the book, in addition to gluing her dad's hat on his head and all of that, is to borrow her friend's parrot in the birdcage and place the cage up the chimney so that her parents hear the parrot speak and think it's a ghost. And she plays along with it, and I believe Roald Dahl describes her as a very good little actress. And she lunges into the room with a chimney and starts fighting off this ghost and starts telling her parents, yes, that the room is haunted and terrifies them thoroughly. It's very amusing. Alright, so before we go into our stock ratings, I have one question for you. For Matilda's 30th anniversary, which was last October 2018, the illustrator, Sir Quentin Blake, he created 8 new images that show her as an adult, 3 of which were used as variant covers for the book's new edition. And they featured Matilda as an astrophysicist, a world traveler, and as chief executive of the British Library, so that readers could choose whichever profession they preferred for her. I'll post these new covers in the show notes, but which profession do you prefer for her?
After having listened to the musical, I think that I see a very lucrative career in professional storytelling. She might even be a podcast host for This American Life. I can totally see that. It seems like she's a very good at storytelling. So if not a storyteller on a podcast, then maybe an author herself.
It's a good choice.
I could have seen her as an author also, since her love of reading is what really sparked her just coming out of her shell. So I can see that. But obviously that was not one of the choices. So chief executive of the British Library is pretty cool. Although I don't know
First
that
librarian
role
in
would
space.
really be quite that magical, to be honest.
I think both of your votes for her as a writer are spot on. She would be an excellent writer. But I'll tell you what the public thinks. In a poll, 29% of respondents thought that Matilda would become a school teacher, just like Miss Honey. I'm also going to tell you what Mary Wilson thinks. She wrote an article for Vanity Fair for the book's 30th anniversary, titled Matilda and Me at 30. I'll post that in the show notes too, so you can read the whole thing, but I'm going to spoil the ending of the article now. She wrote, quote, "It doesn't surprise me to know that so many Matilda fans gravitated to education and to libraries in particular," end quote. And she concluded that Matilda became a children's librarian, and that is obviously the right answer, in my opinion.
You're not biased.
Not at all. Any last thoughts before we move into our stock readings?
No.
All right, in that case, we'll start with you, Grisel, as a newbie, and let's split them up like we usually do when we see an adaptation by book and movie.
I'm using the Goodreads scale today, not the Grisel is a horrible person scale today.
Oh, no.
I'm going to give the book a 2.
Oh, no.
In the sense that it was okay. I liked reading it. It was worth it because it's part of the cultural canon and now I have experiences. But I wouldn't read it again, and it was just okay.
What did you say in the last mini-sode? That we've been sharing our loves and no one loves our loves?
Nobody loves our loves. So
I love your loves.
there are people out there who love this book. I was not one of them. For the movie, I will give it a 3. I think it still has a major nostalgia factor for me, which is why it gets a little bit of an extra point. And I was pleasantly surprised, looking back, to find that it had an incredibly diverse cast.
You did. Monica?
So I'm going to give the book a 4. And that's not because it wasn't perfect. I very, very rarely give books a 5, and they have to be blow my mind amazing. But this got pretty close. It's a protagonist that I like, a story that I really enjoyed, and it literally made me laugh out loud, literally.
Good.
And the movie I'm going to give a 3. It was, the nostalgia factors is playing into that, definitely. But as B said earlier, this is a kids-oriented movie. And some of the dialogue felt a little stilted and, not all the child actors gave that perfect delivery. Mara Wilson included.
That's way harsh talk.
Hey man, they're actors. They're getting paid the big bucks, right?
Well, I'm obviously going to give the book 5 socks. This was my first favorite book and it still means so much to me. I'm going to give the movie a 4, and that's grading on a major nostalgia curve. It's like I said, it's not a masterpiece, but I definitely think it's worth watching if you're with a child or if you are a child. In which case, I don't know why you're listening to this podcast, but welcome. So with that, we can move on to our reading recs. My reading recs this time are once more a mix of children's, young adult, and adult works. The obvious recommendation is to keep reading Roald Dahl's children's fiction. My other favorite of his is The Witches, but I don't remember ever disliking any of them. It's a great time to read or reread these books because Netflix is working on new animated adaptations, and Roald Dahl would probably be furious about this because, as Monica hinted earlier, he tended to loathe the adaptations of his works. And I'll provide more information about that, both the adaptations and the loathing, in the show notes. I'm also going to generally recommend a few children's and young adult series that I think are tonally similar to his works. First up is obviously J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter series, especially the earlier ones and the Dursley sections, which are very much modeled on Roald Dahl's books. There's also Lemony Snicket's A Series of Unfortunate Events, who I think is his most recent successor, and he has a newer series called All the Wrong Questions. There's Catherine M. Valenti's Fairyland series, and also Shannon Maguire's Wayward Children series. Check out her latest book in particular, called In an Absent Dream, for a protagonist who is bookish like Matilda. And as I mentioned back in episode 15 of this podcast, I think the Mary Poppins books by P.L. Travers, as well as the stage musical, are very similar to Roald Dahl's works in tone. So check out that episode's recommendations too for more options and for another darkly clever children's musical. For adults, I would recommend one of my more recently discovered favorite books, the 2006 novel Special Topics in Calamity Physics by Marisha Pessl. Have you read it yet, Monica?
That would be a no.
She's mentioned it a million times, but I have not yet either.
I have not.
Why would you read it? It's so good! Both Matilda and Blue, the teenage protagonists of Special Topics, as you discover when you read it, they're both brainy, bookish girls with turbulent home lives who find sanctuary in their schools under the guidance of teachers who take a special interest in them. And when the girls learn of their teachers' tragic backstories, they take it upon themselves to help. It's a great book, and it's also a great match for Matilda. And everything from the genius protagonist to the illustrations done by the author herself to the frequent references to other books. But please don't give it to your kids unless you want to answer a lot of uncomfortable questions. I will also mention my favorite Jane Austen novel, Northanger Abbey, both because that protagonist, Catherine Morland, is also a bookworm, and because I think Austen's narrator in that novel is particularly Dahl-esque, although I guess I should say that Dahl's narrators are Austen-esque.
I don't remember enough about it to make a comment on that. But...
Henry told me forever.
The microphone could not quite capture the dance. I'm glad someone else on this podcast shares my love of Northanger Abbey.
He understands muslin.
It's all they ever wore back then, so...
We haven't covered Northanger Abbey on the podcast yet, but we did talk about Jane Austen herself quite a bit back in episode 4, Persuasion, so you can check that out in the meantime. Lastly, as always, I have to recommend the TV series Pushing Daisies, which we covered back in episode 6, and which I think has a very Dull-esque sense of humor. Would you agree?
It does.
The Jim Dale narrator. Maybe Jim Dale should have narrated the Matilda movie. It's definitely an adult show, not a kid's one, but I think it's safe to share with older kids, at least ones who would be okay with outlandishly stylized murders and wordplay-based innuendo.
So my recommendations are going to start with another Roald Dahl property, and that is Fantastic Mr. Fox. And I think it's well established by now that I strongly enjoy audiobooks.
This episode is not sponsored by Audible. Maybe it should be.
So I'm going to recommend the audiobook of Fantastic Mr. Fox, read by Chris O'Dowd of Bridesmaids and the IT Crowd fame. It is excellent. I will admit to reading it at a slightly faster pace than the audiobook came in. I think it was like 1.5 speed, but it's funnier that way. Just fun fact. And something that children I feel will really love. I loved it. I'm a huge fan of Wes Anderson, so I thought, why not start there? And the book is great. Also, as I said before, the Matilda audiobook read by Kate Winslet. Here's also where you're going to get my shameless Paddington the Book series by Michael Bond plug, because I am a huge Paddington fan. And I do love the films as well, and they're very enjoyable, especially the second film. As an adult, my husband and I were the only adults without children there. And it's just the tone, again, talking about tone, and the way that Paddington speaks, it's just, you listen to it, his voice in the books is so very similar to that which Matilda and the children speak.
I feel like this is all very long con of bees to get me to watch Paddington 2.
That's the sole reason I brought you here, Monica, to convince you to finally watch Paddington 2.
Though. Who doesn't love the little bear from Darkest Peru?
Oh.
Griselle.
I just haven't seen it yet.
Yeah, but only because she hasn't met him yet.
You will see him. You will love him. I'm also going to recommend the Madeline book series by Ludwig Bemelmans, because Madeline and Matilda both share a real spunkiness, a desire to help out friends. I'm also going to recommend L'Élégance du Hérisson. I apologize to our French listeners if that is not said correctly, but it does translate into The Elegance of the Hedgehog by Muriel Barbary. It also features a precocious child as its chief narrators, but this one's a little bit naughtier than Matilda, and some of the stakes are a little bit more serious. It's basically a book of philosophy disguised as a book of fiction. And again, I'm going to recommend the audiobook just because it's a little bit hard to get through in the first few chapters, but once you dig in, it's a really juicy story. And not at all what you would imagine from the first few chapters.
I'm going to recommend my favorite naughty girl child, and that is Pippi Longstocking by Astrid Lindgren. And for some history on a not awful children's author, I recommend her diaries, War Diaries, which cover her early years as a writer and a mother trying to make sense of World War II. It's a really good read, actually. And it is based in Griselle's favorite place that is not Switzerland. Catch that if you know the trivia. I'll also recommend the Georgia Nicholson series by Louise Renison for teenage silliness in a British school with a militaristic headmistress. And this is a last-minute addition that I came up with as we were preparing for this episode, and that is Carrie by Stephen King for telekinesis and a revenge side of justice.
I really like that recommendation.
Monica, thanks again for being here today and for being our first ever guest on the podcast.
I think we've had a very engaging discussion, and I'm glad that you were able to join us.
That concludes this episode of the Bluestocking Circle podcast. For the show notes, visit thebluestockingcircle.com. Find us on Twitter, Tumblr, Instagram, Pinterest, and pretty much everywhere at BlueSockCircle. That's Blue, S-O-X, Circle. Email us at thebluestockingcircle@gmail.com to join the conversation. You may also find us on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, and YouTube, so please rate, review, and subscribe to help us grow. Cheers! Yay!
Yay!
That was Monica plotting herself. We've known each other for what, 11 years now, Monica?
What?
That was an excellent sound effect. I think we need to save that for future episodes.
Okay,
you want to try that again?
Are you telling me that was insufficient? How do you eat an elephant?
One bite at a time.
There you are.
There you go. Very pragmatic.
Did you hear that fun fact?
What's fun?
You just said fun fact and gave your fun fact, Monica. You're fitting right in.